Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a story that's, it's both tragic and incredibly complex.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it.
It's the story of Alicia Bramfield.
Okay.
She was a young woman, just 21, and was tragically murdered during a trip
Oh, wow.
to Door County, Wisconsin.
Okay.
It gets even more complicated. She was there for her boss's sister's wedding. You've really given us a lot to unpack here. Court transcripts, interviews, even audio from the police interrogation. I feel like we're about to uncover something, like peel back the layers of a really complicated onion.
Absolutely, yeah. And from what I'm seeing, this isn't just a simple whodunit.
Right.
There's more here. We've got power dynamics, potential manipulation, and then there's the whole legal aspect of using intoxication as a defense.
It's a lot more than a simple news story. Alicia was, like I said, 21, expecting her first child. She was working at a garden center to, make ends meet. It's hard to imagine her life being cut short, especially in Door County is known for its beauty, right? It's a vacation spot.
Right. It's usually seen as this idyllic escape, charming towns, beautiful scenery. But, as we're about to see, there's a much darker story hidden beneath the surface.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. Alicia had been working at this garden center since she was 16, and her boss, Brian Cooper, was, quite a bit older. What can you tell me about him?
From the information you've provided, Brian Cooper was 36 years old. And he'd been Alicia's supervisor for quite a few years, actually. So,
Yeah.
right off the bat, there's that significant age gap and that inherent power differential.
And that power dynamic, that becomes even more important when we look at what happened that weekend. It all started at the wedding, but the next day, things took a really dark turn. Alicia's body was discovered in a hotel room, but not with the rest of the wedding party, a separate hotel room, a separate location.
Yeah, that's a really important detail. It could point to premeditation, maybe even an attempt to isolate her from any potential witnesses.
And the scene itself, it wasn't straightforward. There were signs of a struggle, bruising on her neck, even defensive wounds on her hands, all the classic signs of violent confrontation. But then there was this detail, and this one really got to me. Her body was covered with a blanket,
Hmm,
like someone had tucked her in, and her head was resting on a pillow.
that's strange. That's definitely not typical. Staging a crime scene like that, it often suggests some pretty complex psychological stuff going on. It could be an attempt to downplay the violence, almost like an expression of remorse, even if it's subconscious. Or it could be something more calculated, an attempt to manipulate how the crime is perceived. There's research on this, and it suggests that people who stage crime scenes, they're often driven by this need for control, not just over the victim, but over how the whole thing is seen.
So we have this disturbing scene, the staged scene, and then the 911 call comes in. And guess who made it?
Don't tell me, Brian Cooper.
Brian Cooper himself. And he confesses to the murder, just like that, right on the phone.
Wow. It's unusual, to say the least. Most perpetrators, they don't call 911 and just, admit everything. It often points to a very particular mindset. Maybe you need to get caught, a desire for attention, even a sense of guilt, but like a really messed up version of guilt. It's hard to say for sure.
And right after that call, Cooper attempts to drown himself in a nearby lake.
So a confession, a staged crime scene, and a suicide attempt. It seems pretty clear cut, right?
You'd think so, but that's where this case gets really interesting. It starts to unravel.
And I bet that's where the interrogation tapes come in. They're our window into Cooper's thinking, right?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, based on everything else, his story is going to clash with what we already know and what Alicia's loved ones have to say.
You got it. Okay, let's break down the interrogation. Right from the start, Cooper tries to paint a picture of a romantic relationship. He talks about arguments, claims they were, quote, somewhat dating.
Somewhat
Dating, I know, right? He brings up Alicia's pregnancy, even saying that he respected her because of it. It's all very strange.
It definitely seems like he's trying to frame the narrative, right? Construct this story of a troubled romance. Maybe he thinks it justifies what he did. But when we look at what Alicia's family and friends have said, it's a totally different story.
Absolutely. Alicia's mother and stepfather, Cher and Joe, they had no idea about this supposed romantic relationship. They were completely blindsided. They saw it as strictly professional.
Right.
They even said that they didn't even know Cooper's real age until after Alicia was killed.
What do you mean?
They thought he was much younger than he actually was.
That's a huge discrepancy.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if Cooper was intentionally blurring those lines, between professional and personal. Maybe to make Alicia feel more comfortable with him, or maybe to manipulate her. It all ties back to that power dynamic we were talking about earlier.
And it gets even more disturbing when we consider what Alicia's friends told investigators. They confirmed that Alicia had confided in them. She felt uncomfortable with Cooper's advances. And she was terrified of losing her job if she rejected him. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a troubled romance. It was a classic case of coercion.
Absolutely. She was young, pregnant, needed that job. It's a recipe for exploitation, especially by someone in a position of authority. That fear of losing her livelihood, especially when she's about to become a mother, that's immense pressure to just go along with whatever's happening.
And then as we dig deeper into those interrogation tapes, we come across a truly chilling revelation that takes this case to a whole other level of disturbing. Cooper admits to setting up a spy camera in the hotel bathroom to record Alicia.
Oh, God.
I know, right?
That's a whole different level of control, of obsession. It's not just about a workplace issue or even a misconstrued romance anymore. This is a calculated violation of her privacy. He had no regard for her well-being. It's a terrible example of how power can be twisted and how seemingly innocent situations can hide something much darker.
And the recordings don't stop there. He also mentions planting cameras in his own bathroom. Turns out Alicia had used that bathroom when walking his dog, so he'd been secretly recording her for God knows how long.
This is textbook escalation. It's what you often see in cases of obsessive behavior. He needed to know everything she was doing, every move she made. And that, combined with the violence, well, it fits a pattern, the if I can't have her, nobody will mentality. It's something you see in cases of stalking, domestic violence. It's scary stuff.
So we have a confession, a staged crime scene, a suicide attempt, and now this hidden camera scheme. You'd think it would be open and shut, right? But like you said earlier, this is where the legal side of things gets complicated. Cooper's defense had a really unexpected strategy, and it all hinged on a controversial legal principle, voluntary intoxication.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting, even if it's frustrating. Despite all the evidence we've talked about, Cooper's lawyers argued that because he was drinking so much, he wasn't capable of forming the intent to kill. They were trying to lessen his responsibility by claiming he was basically too drunk to understand what he was doing.
So he's blaming the alcohol? Can they actually get away with that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It all boils down to what's called mens rea, which is Latin for guilty mind. It's a legal term that means basically the mental state someone has to be in to be convicted of a certain crime. In this case, it's first-degree intentional homicide. And the defense is arguing that because of his extreme intoxication, he didn't have the necessary mens rea. It's a tough defense to pull off, though. It's on the defendant to prove their level of intoxication was so high that they couldn't possibly have formed the intent.
And did the jury buy it? Did they believe him?
Well, the first trial actually resulted in a hung jury. 10 jurors voted to convict, but 2 didn't. It just goes to show how tricky this defense can be, and of course how difficult it was for everyone involved, especially Alicia's family.
I can't imagine how agonizing that must have been, knowing that the man who admitted to killing your daughter could just walk free because of some legal technicality. It feels like a slap in the face.
It definitely would feel that way, and that feeling, that injustice, is what fueled Alicia's family to keep fighting. Not just for Alicia, but to change the very laws that allowed this defense to be used in such a horrible crime.
And that fight, that's what led to what we now call Alicia's Law. But before we get into that, let's talk about something else. The incredible work Alicia's family has done to honor her memory and her unborn child, Ava. They didn't just seek justice, they created something truly remarkable.
Yeah, that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about tragedy and legal battles. It's about resilience, about the love that endures even in the face of unimaginable loss. It's about the Purple Project and how it became a beacon of hope.
I mean, it's just incredible how, even with everything they were going through, they were able to think about others, other families facing similar tragedies. What was the driving force behind the Purple Project?
It really came from this deep need to turn their pain into something meaningful. Cher and Joe, Alicia's mom and stepdad, they couldn't bear the thought of other families suffering the same way they were. They wanted to honor Alicia's memory and Ava's, and that's how the Purple Project was born. It's a support system for grieving parents and young single moms.
And the color purple, that was Alicia's favorite, right?
Yeah, it was
Such a powerful symbol. But start an organization like that while you're still grieving, still fighting for justice, that couldn't have been easy. What were some of the challenges they ran into?
Well, building any organization from scratch is hard, but doing it while dealing with the emotional turmoil of losing a child, and fighting for legal reform. That's extraordinary. I think one of the biggest hurdles was just getting people to understand the whole voluntary intoxication defense, why it needed to change.
Yeah, it's a tough concept to grasp. The idea that someone can commit a horrific crime and then potentially get away with it because they were drunk. It just feels so wrong.
Right, and that's exactly what Shearer and Joe were up against. But they didn't give up. They started a grassroots campaign, sharing Alicia's story at community events, talking to lawmakers. They really wanted to change Wisconsin's laws.
But I imagine there was pushback, right? People who wanted to keep things the way they were.
Oh, absolutely. There's always resistance to change. Some people argued that changing the law would infringe on individual rights, that kind of thing. It wasn't an easy fight.
So how did they do it? How did they manage to overcome all of that and get Alicia's law passed?
It was a combination of things. First, their dedication was unwavering. When they talked about Alicia, the raw emotion, it resonated with people. It made the issue real, impossible to ignore. And they were smart about it, too. They built alliances with lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. They made it clear that this wasn't about politics. It was about common sense reform to protect victims. And they used the media to keep Alicia's story in the public eye, to keep the pressure on.
It's amazing the power of persistence, and it shows what individuals can achieve when they channel their grief and anger into something positive. So in terms of legal precedent, what does Alicia's law actually change?
Alicia's law makes it much harder to use voluntary intoxication as a defense in homicide cases in Wisconsin. It doesn't eliminate the defense completely, but it sets a higher standard of proof. The defendant now has to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that their level of intoxication was so high that they couldn't have possibly intended to kill.
So it's a significant win for victims' rights, a real legacy for Alicia and Ava. But passing a law, that didn't bring them back. The family still had to go through another trial.
That's right. While the fight for Alicia's law was a victory, it was separate from the criminal case. The second trial, with a new jury, brought its own set of challenges and emotional strain for the family.
What was different about the second trial?
The main difference was the context surrounding the voluntary intoxication defense. With Alicia's law, now in effect, the defense team had a much tougher job. They had to meet a much higher burden of proof to show that Cooper was so intoxicated that he was incapable of forming intent.
And did they succeed this time?
This time, the jury saw through it. They saw the evidence, and they found Cooper guilty. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one for Alicia and one for Ava.
Finally, justice for Alicia and Ava. It must have been a bittersweet moment for the family. Relief, but mixed with the crushing weight of their loss.
Absolutely. At the sentencing, the judge told Cooper, "The remainder of your life is in my hands," and sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms, no chance of parole.
Wow, that's powerful. But even with the guilty verdict and the sentence, the healing process for the family was just starting. And that's where the Purple Project really comes in.
It really is remarkable. Instead of letting their pain consume them, Shearer and Joe focused on helping others.
You mentioned that the Purple Project supports grieving parents and young single mothers. What are some of the ways they do that?
They offer all sorts of services: grief counseling, support groups, retreats for parents who've lost children, and financial help for young single moms struggling to make ends meet. They even created a place called Alicia's House of Hope. It's a transitional living facility that provides safe housing and resources for moms in need.
It's amazing how they've built this whole support network.
And what's really impactful is the sense of community. They create a space where people who have experienced similar losses can connect, share their stories, and support each other. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, human connection can be a source of strength.
It's a truly fitting tribute to Alicia and Ava. But what about the impact beyond their community? Have they been able to reach a wider audience?
Oh, definitely. Through their advocacy, their fundraising, and their online presence, they've raised awareness about domestic violence, workplace harassment, and the importance of supporting grieving families. They've even partnered with other organizations to expand access to resources and advocate for policy changes.
It's incredible. They've taken their personal tragedy and turned it into a movement for change. It really shows that we all have the power to make a difference.
And it highlights how one person's actions can have a ripple effect. Alicia's story, her family's fight, and the Purple Project. It's all touched so many lives and continues to inspire people to act, to speak up, and to make the world a little bit better.
This deep dive has been quite the journey. We've explored the darkness of violence, the intricacies of the legal system, and the incredible power of the human spirit to overcome even the most profound loss.
Yeah, and it's a story of hope and resilience. Even when faced with the unimaginable, we can choose to find meaning, purpose, and connection.
So, as we wrap things up, what can our listeners take away from this story?
I think the takeaway is that we all have a part to play in building a safer, more just, and more compassionate world. Whether it's speaking out against injustice, supporting organizations like the Purple Project, or just listening to someone who's hurting. Every act of kindness, every voice that speaks up, it all makes a difference.
And sometimes the biggest changes start with a simple question. So, as we end this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. What will your legacy be? How will you use your voice, your actions, to make a positive impact on the world? It's just, thinking about this whole case about the Purple Project and the work they do, I can't help but think about that moment in the interrogation where Cooper admits to the cameras. It really gets to you the idea that even in seemingly normal places, like at work, this kind of darkness can exist.
It does make you think. And it really emphasizes how important it is to be aware, to trust your gut, to create a culture where people feel safe speaking up if something feels off.
Definitely. We need zero tolerance for any kind of harassment or abuse, whether it's at work, at home, anywhere. But it's not enough to just say speak up. We need to have systems in place that actually support people who come forward.
Right. Because right now, a lot of people, especially those in vulnerable positions, they're afraid to report anything. They're worried about retaliation, or they just don't think anyone will take them seriously. That's where real change needs to happen.
So what can we do to change things?
Well, companies and organizations, they need clear policies. They need to spell out exactly what's not okay and have a process for reporting and investigating complaints. And just as important, they need to train their employees. And I don't mean just a one-time online course. It needs to be ongoing, creating a culture of respect and accountability.
It's about changing attitudes, not just checking boxes. But even with the best policies, the best training, there are still going to be people who abuse their power. That's why places like the Purple Project are so vital. They provide a safety net.
Exactly. And it's not just practical help. It's emotional support, a sense of community. They help victims navigate the legal system, find counseling, rebuild their lives. It's amazing.
Thinking back on everything, the trials, Alicia's Law, the Purple Project, it's clear this is much bigger than one case.
It is.
It's a reflection of bigger problems we need to address as a society.
You're right. It forces us to look at those uncomfortable things. Power imbalances, gender inequality, the ways our legal system can sometimes fail to protect the people who need it most. But it also shows us the power of human resilience, that positive change is possible even after something so terrible.
And that's what we want people to remember. You've heard Alicia's story, her family's fight for justice, and the incredible legacy they've built with the Purple Project. Now it's time to think about your own role. What can you do to create a world where stories like this happen less often? A world where everyone feels empowered to speak up and where victims are supported?
Change starts with each of us. It starts with awareness, with empathy, with action. What will your contribution be? How will you make a difference?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Alicia Bramfield case. We hope this has made you think, challenged your assumptions, and inspired you to create change in your community. We'll be back soon with another thought-provoking deep dive, but until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep making a difference.